Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
A very good afternoon. The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Trading with Trump 2.0, a senior Democrat suggests the UK could be offered a lane to ease trade because of Brexit. China announces a new $1.4 trillion stimulus package as it prepares for a possible trade war with President-elect Trump. And Jaguar Land Rover blames a shortage of aluminium for its 10% drop in profits. Very good afternoon and welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey, on this Friday. And on his way to that sweeping election victory, Donald Trump promised to hit Chinese exports with punishing tariffs. If that happens, it could spark a trade war with Beijing. But what does the president-elect have planned for the UK? Well, a senior Democrat today, who knows Donald Trump, said that Britain could possibly be given a lane for trade because of Brexit, a special deal, if you like. Let's talk about this and much more with Maurice Reid. He's a political strategist and a former advisor to Bill Clinton. Very good afternoon to you, Maurice. We spoke, didn't we, just before the election?
We did.
Donald Trump is now, or will be soon, back in the White House. Let's talk, if we can, about trade and particularly tariffs first. What is President-elect Trump's rationale, if you like, for imposing quite punitive tariffs, not just on China, but also potentially on the rest of the world too?
Well, he sees it as a fairness issue. He doesn't believe that the international companies have been paying their fair share. This is also a political, domestic messaging as well, where he's trying to protect market growth and market shares. Ultimately, there will be ways to work around this. This will be a new territory for European countries and for the UK, because they'll have to think very differently about how they engage him. But certainly for China, this will be a really challenging time, and they're going to have to really figure out a new negotiating path to deal with the president-elect.
It is going to be a difficult time for China, maybe for the rest of us too. I suppose in the end, the problem is that this also could create problems at home, couldn't it, for Donald Trump? It could lead to inflation, something he said he's trying to eliminate.
Yeah, it's clear that it could lead to inflation. It also could lead to across-the-board unemployment as well, because if people start to pull away from America, there are a lot of American companies, particularly in the South, where Donald Trump is particularly strong, Alabama, Mississippi, where their foreign companies have manufacturing bases. If they start to pull away those jobs, that can certainly hurt him. So he's got to really think carefully about how he implements the rhetoric that he talked about during the campaign and actually governs. There certainly will be tariffs. China, absolutely. Europe, UK, I think there's going to be a nuance here. The UK is going to have to find better ways to engage him, and they're going to have to bring the business community to the table, but they're also going to have to look for allies on Congress.
Do you think, just on that point, that the UK, because of their special relationship, something we probably emphasise more than America does, that we could get a special deal or be given special preference as compared to the rest of Europe, for example? I like that you've got a very large wry smile on your face.
Listen, the only special relationship that works with Donald Trump is how special you are to him on a given day. The most important thing is to engage him, understand what motivates him, and engage him in a very comprehensive manner. Look at the domestic piece, look at the international piece, but also look at how it works for you ultimately. The UK does have a leg up on, say, Germany or France because of his affinity for the UK. He's had strong relationships there as well. He's done business there. So the UK should be in a better position. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a special relation in the traditional sense.
Let's look at the Fed, if we can. They cut interest rates yesterday, but there's also been suggestions that Donald Trump might try and undermine, if you like, the independence of the Federal Reserve. Do you think that's realistic?
I don't think it's wise. I think he felt that the Fed was working against him during the campaign. He also had some challenges with the chairman. However, now when you are in power, he has really done something unprecedented. Not only did he come back, but he has the entire Congress, the entire Washington working on his side. So I think he's going to turn down the rhetoric. He'll have a lot of business people around him who will say, listen, we need to keep the Fed independent for the strong dollar policy, making sure we're the currency of brass reserve, all these things that make America great because of the independence of the Fed. So I think that's rhetoric. I don't believe he will go that far. However, that doesn't mean that he won't get into the Fed chairman's face. He won't challenge him, and he will do things non-traditional that most Americans, presidents don't do, which is to challenge overtly the Fed policy.
And Morris, we said you were a former advisor to Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. And many people look back at that era in the 90s as kind of almost the pinnacle of globalization, if you like. And since then, and it's not just Donald Trump, we've seen a retrenchment. Are we likely to see that get more acute, if you like, over the next decade or so, that actually globalization is in reverse?
Well, it's interesting because globalization has worked from a macro standpoint. What hasn't worked is that there hasn't been enough investment in retraining. Take, for example, where I grew up in Ohio. We had rubber companies, manufacturing company. Those jobs moved to China, to Japan, and other places. The workers were never retrained. So when you have a situation where you stop manufacturing, when you stop doing things with your hands, and you're not retraining people for the next future, the jobs of the future, that's the problem. So there was never a comprehensive strategy on like, okay, we're going to move with globalization, but we need to also take care of the workers. This is where politicians has failed. Not just American people, but employees around the world. This is why there's a lot of pressure on global trade, and it will not end until people understand that you can have global trade, but you have to also make sure people have employment, long-term employment for the future.
OK, Morris, really appreciate your time this afternoon. That's Morris Reid there joining us live from Washington. Well, staying on this topic, one man that's been touted as a link between the UK and the White House is, of course, the Reform leader, Nigel Farage. Well, this afternoon, when asked about his relationship with Donald Trump, he accused the UK government of putting its dislike of him above the national interests. Sky's Ali Fortescue spoke to him at the Reform UK Welsh conference and asked him what he made of the government snubbing his offer to help build bridges with the president-elect.
Fine. Do as you wish. You know, if you think that a foreign secretary that compares the incoming US president to a neo-Nazi is helpful, great. If you think a party that sent 100 staffers to campaign against Donald Trump for Kamala Harris is the right way to start a new relationship, great. If you think your dislike of me is more important than the national interest, great, carry on.
You obviously see yourself as a bit of a Trump whisperer. Could you be the next US ambassador?
No, that isn't going to happen because, you know, well, number one, they'd never appoint me, and number two, if I was the US ambassador, I would have to toe the line that the government's taking on a whole range of issues. That is it. Look, all I've said is, and it's not just my relationship with Donald Trump. That's not the point. You know, at least half the cabinet that he appoints are going to be people that I've known for a long time. I think I could be useful. And I would do that, even though I disagree with almost everything the Labour government's doing. But it is in our national interest to have a good relationship.
I think that was Nigel Farage speaking a short while ago. Well, let's now talk to Duncan Edwards. He's Chief Executive of the Transatlantic Trade Association, British-American Business. A very good afternoon to you, Duncan. Before we get into the details, if you like, can you just talk us through how important that transatlantic trading relationship is to us here in the UK?
Yeah, well, it's huge. And the US-UK economic and business relationship is one of the largest and most valuable in the world. Trading goods between the US and the UK is the 5th largest relationship in the world. Trade in services is by far the largest in the world. And the investment relationship, so the scale at which US companies have invested in the UK and UK companies have invested in the US, is also the largest bilateral relationship in the world. So it's a hugely valuable economic and business relationship that benefits both countries.
And there's been much talk, including on this programme, about tariffs, if you like, between the United States imposing essentially on Britain, would that have less of an impact than, let's say, Germany, for example, in the sense that actually lots of our trade with the US is in services rather than in actual physical goods?
Yeah, that's probably correct. I mean, what you have to understand is what is the driving principles behind this concern in the US about trade. And the US has a trade deficit with most countries around the world. In other words, it sells less to them than they sell to it. And yet the US has much lower tariffs on average. So the US is a very open market. So what that has encouraged is companies to locate their manufacturing outside of the US and then sell the goods into the US because the tariff barrier is very low. And, Trump has been consistent about this for 30 or 40 years, that he believes that's wrong and unfair. And I think that's part of the mandate that he's now been given in the US, whether you agree with it or not, to change that. So I think he's serious about this, particularly where the trade deficits are big, which is China is the biggest target. But I don't think European countries are going to be immune from that either. In the case of the UK, actually, the trade balance isn't that far out. So the UK is definitely not the reason for the tariff policy, but it may get caught up in this unless it takes a proactive approach, which I think it can do.
Well, that's my point, isn't it, Duncan? In many ways, can our special relationship get us a special deal?
Well, I don't think it's a special deal. I just think it's a deal that works for the UK and for the US. I mean, I think the deal, any agreement would have to be accepted in the US on its merits, not just because they're friendly to the UK. But there is an opportunity here. The last time Trump was the president, there was actually pretty good progress made on a trade agreement during 2020. 5 rounds of negotiations between the US Trade Representative's Office and the Department for Business and Trade, only interrupted because the election happened in the US. And there was some very solid progress. Trump is warm towards the UK. There isn't the same kind of arbitrage on salaries and wages that encourages outsourcing to the UK that there is in other countries. So there's an opportunity there. And I'm sure that the UK government, with the good advice from its team in Washington, is working on how to make that approach.
And just on that, Duncan, it's your job in part to promote British-American trade, isn't it? Do you think should Nigel Farage be part of that?
Honestly, I don't think that's remotely practical. So I think you've got very good people around the UK government who know what they're doing, and they'll find the right people to engage in trade negotiations, either in London or through their team in Washington.
OK, Duncan. By the way, very impressed with your Watford Forever book behind you there.
That's my hometown.
And, live from New York, who would have thought? Thank you very much indeed, Duncan Edwards, Chief Executive at British American Business. Thanks a lot. Now, Beijing has announced a new $1.4 trillion stimulus package to help kickstart its faltering economy. The plans will help local government with debt repayments, with China's finance minister suggesting that further stimulus measures are on the way. But it comes as China is also bracing for that potential big threat of trade tariffs from Donald Trump when he moves in to the White House. We've been speaking to our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnston, who's the very latest.
The timing of this is really interesting, isn't it? That China's top legislative council decided to have this meeting for 5 days to come up with a stimulus package in the same week as the US election, which makes you think that China was waiting to see who the winner of that election would be. Well, we know that it is President-elect Trump, and that is going to have a big impact on the economy here if these tariffs go ahead. So as for the stimulus package, the most significant part of it is some $840 billion that's been earmarked to help these local governments. Because that's one of the big issues here. These local governments are drowning in debt, some $2 trillion worth of hidden debt, so debt that's off the books. Now, the government here knows that that is a massive problem. There had been some sort of tinkering around the edges to try and deal with it, but this is a significant development to try and handle that problem. All of this, of course, stems back to the real estate issue. As the real estate sector here, various parts of it started to decline and collapse, then those local governments weren't receiving their taxes that they would ordinarily get, land sales, and so they started to accumulate this debt. I think it's still too early to tell what kind of impact this will have. This will be introduced over the next 3 years, but it is the latest in a series of stimulus packages in this country.
Let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of the business news on this Friday afternoon. And Jaguar Land Rover says that a shortage of aluminium has led to a 10% drop in its profits. The Coventry-based car maker said flooding in Switzerland had affected supplies and slowed car production. It reported a pre-tax profit of £398 million between July and September. That's a tenth lower than in the same period last year. Asda's become the latest supermarket to warn of rising prices due to tax changes in last week's budget. Its chairman, Lord Stuart Rose, said the increase in employer taxes is a big burden for business to carry and will hit the retailer with £100 million in extra costs. He said the supermarket will do all it can not to pass the costs on to consumers, but it is likely to result in rising costs at the supermarket in some form. In a significant legal victory, thousands of Bolt drivers have been recognised as workers, securing rights to paid holiday and the minimum wage. The tribunal determined that the relationship between Bolt and its drivers does not constitute self-employment, as had been claimed by the company, but rather an employment arrangement granting the drivers essential worker protections under employment laws. The ruling affects all of the 100,000 plus drivers who take on work through the Bolt private hailing app here in the UK. OK, we're going to pause there on Business Live. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be looking at how the markets are faring this afternoon. As you can see, the FTSE has ended down 0.84%. We'll have all the details of why in just a couple of minutes.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it. This is brilliant.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world, the likes of Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Sir Elton John. We try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life. Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Well, let's take you through the markets, and we're going to begin on Wall Street, where US stocks are on course for the best week so far this year, powered by Donald Trump's election win and that interest rate cut from the Fed yesterday. The Dow and Nasdaq both, well, they were both up, but as you can see, the Nasdaq's just dropped the tiniest of margins in the last minute or so. On Europe, things are a little less rosy, with heavyweight luxury firms among the biggest fallers. As you can see, it's not been great across Europe. Here, the FTSE 100 closed down also at 0.84%, with mining stocks down because of disappointment at fresh stimulus plans from China. Antofagasta, Anglo America, Rio Tinto and Glencore all down today. The big faller also being a house builder, Vistry, which has had to cut its profit guidance for this year. But in positive territory is British Airways, or the company that owns it, IAG, which has finished up more than 7% after a big rise in profits and a share buyback scheme. On the currencies, as you can see, the pound has slipped again against the dollar a little bit today, but is up against the euro at €1.20. And finally, a barrel of Brent crude is down more than 2.5% at $73.69. Let's bring in Sam Kerr. He is head of equity at capital markets at Merger Market. Very good afternoon to you, Sam. Let's just focus on the US and the stock market there. One of the strongest, if not the strongest week of the year so far. And they seem pretty pleased with Donald Trump's victory.
Absolutely. I think US equity markets have really embraced the Trump win. A lot of that, I think, is to do with it being a real relief trade. I think there was a lot of market fear before the election result was made clear that we might be in for a repeat of 2020 with a disputed election result. But overall, I think the pictures for stocks are still a little bit cloudy in the long term, just as we read the tea leaves around what the next administration might do. But this rally that we're seeing is really being led by US banks and big tech, where you're going to see, I think, quite a bit of benefit from deregulation and tax cuts. So that's what I think is driving that sort of very strong reaction in the US at the moment.
Yeah, there you go. The Nasdaq up now a little, 0.1%. So when you look at that response from the markets, they do seem, as you say, pretty pleased. But Donald Trump is going to do things that actually people in the market, people in business, we've just been talking about it on this programme, tariffs, for example, that they won't like. Is this kind of a honeymoon period, as you say, a period of certainty before potentially a very unpredictable 4 years?
Investors are getting very good, I think, at waiting for the bad news to come, I think, before trading on it. But at the moment, I think what we are starting to see already, and you had it up with the luxury stocks before, is the picking of what people think are going to be winners and losers. In Europe, that does look a lot harder at the moment, just given the impact tariffs would have on European industry as a whole. But I think immediate beneficiaries you're going to see in the form of defence companies, given the belief that European countries are going to have to spend a lot more on their own defence now President Trump is returning to the White House. The losers are going to be those large exporters, the luxury companies, and I would say automakers as well, particularly the big German automakers who have a lot of trade with the United States. One thing that's going to be interesting for us, I think, is going to be on the IPO market and how that's going to be affected by the return of Trump next year. We've had a very good year for IPOs in 2024. According to our merger market data, new listings are up about 15% in Europe this year. What I think is going to happen is we are going to see the market soldiering on until they have to pull deals, but we will get sector-specific volatility if this tariff threat goes ahead.
It's kind of been slightly overshadowed because it's been a big week for news, but we should focus on the interest rate cuts that we saw both in the UK and in the US yesterday. Do you think these interest rate cuts are going to run in parallel, or do you think that, given the different prospects now for the US and the UK, that actually both the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England will be looking at things slightly differently in the months ahead?
Well, this is it, isn't it? We've had a very, very big week, or a couple of weeks really, for those two central banks. The Bank of England made it clear yesterday that it sees the budget as inflationary and that rate cuts will be slower due to that budget. And I think if rate cuts are halted or significantly slowed, that's going to put significant pressure on the government to either change tack. The Fed, Jerome Powell made it clear that he didn't think Trump's re-election was going to affect the direction of rates. But there will be certainly pressure on him from President Trump, who, given previous statements he's made about the Federal Reserve and his desire to see interest rate cuts. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on both those banks to perhaps do things and cut faster than they might want to.
Yeah, it's going to be, we've got a couple of months before he gets into the White House. It's going to be a fascinating time, and indeed to see who his team are when he gets around to appointing them. Sam Kerr, live for us there from Merger Market. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Well, that is it for me on Business Live for today. We're back, of course, on Monday morning at 11:30. Coming up next, it's the News Hour with Seema. Very latest on that clashes, those attacks we saw overnight in Amsterdam. That is coming up in the News Hour in just a couple of minutes. But as I say, that's it from me for now. Have a nice weekend, and I'll see you back on Monday.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before?
Yes.
Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
It's 5 o'clock. I'm Simon Mawson. This is the News Hour. Our top stories. The Dutch king says his country failed the Jewish community like it did in World War II after supporters of an Israeli football team are attacked in Amsterdam.